Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities. Before we begin the meeting, I want to remind all in-person participants to read the best practices guidelines on the cards on the table. These measures are in place to protect the health and safety of all participants. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, and pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, September 18th, 2023, the committee is resuming its study of regulations of recreational boating on Canada's waterways. All witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. Colleagues, I'd now like to welcome our witnesses here with us today and joining us online. As an individual, we have Dr. Colin Rennie, Professor, University of Ottawa. Welcome to you, sir. As an individual, we have Dr. Jesse Vermeer, Associate Professor, Carleton University. Welcome. From Canadian Power and Sail Squadrons, we have John Gullick, Manager, Government and Special Programs by video conference. Welcome to you, sir. La Fondation Rivière, nous avons Monsieur André Bélanger. Bienvenue.
Mr. André Bélanger, welcome. And Coralie Massé-Quentin, welcome. Mr. Bélanger or Coralie, you have 5 minutes. Thank you. For a long time, the Fondation Rivière has been trying to protect the water access to the shoreline, and we believe that we have to encourage greater use of the waterways, because the more people use the waterways and the more people who love it, the more people will want to protect it. So we just completed consultation to come up with a sustainable cohabitation model, and we believe that this will be a subject for your reflections. And there are 20 municipalities that participated in the activity, various citizen representations, Caillou-Québec, de Quebec. Everyone was around the table. And we identified 71 access points. 70% of them were reserved for pleasure navigation. It's only normal because the Richelieu River is an important waterway between Canada and the United States. But for a long time, it was exclusively used for pleasure navigation, and this is what is currently monopolizing activities. It's no longer the case today. The consultation has highlighted the need for people to encourage other types of use, kayaking, scuba diving, and so on, and fishing as well. And this desire for open-air activities is increasing, and this has also shown that the people want to protect the area. The Richelieu is a waterway. It's the second biggest river in Quebec when it comes to the number of fish species that you find there, after the Outaouais River. So it's rich in biodiversity. What we also realized is that to protect the river, we need regulations on 30 of the kilometers there. We need to protect about 30 or so kilometers because there are areas where there's conflict of use. So we need to implement some prohibitions, impose speed limits in some areas, and in some other areas develop navigation corridors, reserve some areas for divers, and so on. In principle, these are simple solutions. It's not a lot. You see a corridor and we could install a number of things. In practice, the solution will be necessarily complicated because the regulatory process right now is complex, outdated, and very cumbersome. First of all, Transport Canada has talked about the premise of awareness raising. This would avoid conflicts of use. That is false. It's because some of the uses is not compatible. You need zones for swimmers and areas for boating. We need the right use in the right place. That's the first premise. The second is that the conflict of use doesn't happen with people of goodwill. This happens with delinquents. Those who do not want to listen to reason thinks that the waterway belongs to them, and they do not listen. So when we talk to them about dialogue or awareness raising, you should understand that you cannot educate someone who doesn't want to be educated. So when Transport Canada talks about awareness raising, their premise is that when we use awareness raising, it's going to work. When we completed our work there, we arrived at the conclusion that there is consensus for a form of regulation in some areas, but we need to start awareness raising. So we shall be doing this because we are obligated to do so. It is delaying decision taking. Furthermore, regulation would not provide us with the necessary flexibility to adjust to the various uses and the aspirations of the communities. The solution starts by striking a balance that considers a number of things: the type of boat, speed, and the zones. And it doesn't take into account environmental concerns. It doesn't help to protect the health of the waterways. In the annex which we provided, I'm sure you're going to receive it through the clerk, we have provided a review that provides the impact on turbidity. That's the clarity of water, the shoreline, destruction of endemic aquatic meadows. We can compare meadows to rare plants, but when they are destroyed, it takes a long time for them to grow back, and in some cases, they simply do not grow back. Others before us have spoken at length about the problem of wake boats. Science is clear on that. Wake boats produce a column of water 5 to 7 meters deep, stirring up sediments and destroying aquatic life in the process. Their waves significantly speed up erosion when they travel within 300 meters of the shore. We did the exercise of identifying the sectors of the Richelieu River that are less than 5 meters deep. Can you hear me? Perfect. So there are very few. We also consulted marina owners, and all of them are in favor of reasonable differentiated regulations tailored to the realities of the environment. So awareness raising alone is simply not sufficient to establish a sustainable model of cohabitation. We are making 2 recommendations to Transport Canada. In conjunction with Environment Canada, develop and deploy national navigation standards. What are we waiting for when we know the problem? The process should be adjusted to incorporate environmental considerations. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Belanger.
To Dr. Rennie. Dr. Rennie, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Okay, thank you to the committee for this opportunity to speak to you today. At the outset, I want to note that I did speak to this committee a couple of years ago. Some of you may remember, on the topic of impact of commercial shipping on shoreline erosion. And at that time, I summarized a study on the St. Lawrence River I was conducting, and I reviewed the physics of large ship wake waves and narrow channels, new measurement technologies, nature-based shoreline protection strategies, and current research needs. Here, in collaboration with my colleague, Professor Jesse Vermeer from Carleton, I'll discuss wakes produced by pleasure craft. The likelihood of a boat wake contributing to bank erosion depends on the power of the waves, the water surface elevation with respect to the bank, and bank characteristics that determine bank stability, such as bank angle, sediment grain size, cohesion, consolidation, pore pressure, and vegetation. But it's not only large ships that may induce shoreline erosion. Smaller pleasure craft can also generate relatively large wakes. So wake boats, as an example, are specifically designed with a deep draft to induce a large wake for recreational purposes, such as water skiing. And while pleasure craft are generally too small to generate a large primary drawdown wave, which is what I discussed on the St. Lawrence, the subsequent V-shaped Kelvin wake wave can be large enough to erode shoreline bank sediments. And this has been documented in some previous studies. For example, I give you a reference, Bauer et al., 2002, estimated erosion rates of between 0.01 and 0.22 millimeters per boat passage. So that's a small amount per passage, but the cumulative effects of thousands of passages could be substantial. So we believe there's a need to identify where zero wake zones and speed limits are required to reduce shoreline erosion and ecological impacts associated with recreational watercraft use. Pleasurecraft boat wake has been implicated as a possible contributor to shoreline erosion on the Rideau Canal waterway. So as part of a larger NSERC-funded study in collaboration with Parks Canada, we've been working on measuring boat wake waves and turbidity associated with various pleasure craft in the Rideau River. And we have a study site near Echolands Park, just south of Ottawa. The experimental design involves running various individual boats at set speeds and distances back and forth past an eroding river shoreline cut bank. I will focus here on 3 boat types: an 18-foot bass boat, a 22-foot wake boat, and a 29-foot small cruiser, as you would typically see on the Rideau. The boat speeds we used were slow, medium, fast for each type of boat, and the distances from shore were 30 meters, 60 meters, and 100 meters. We collected various data with several instruments, but here I'll focus on water level and turbidity, collected with a RBR Duo instrument at 2 hertz. And we placed this instrument 6 meters from shore to measure the waves and the turbidity. I also took repeat measurements of the bank over a couple of years using a survey-grade GPS to monitor recession of the bank. As each boat passed and the wake wave train impacted the riverbank, sediments were entrained, resulting in increase in turbidity. And we processed the water level data to extract what's called the significant wave height. This is the average of the top 1/3 of the waves in the wake train. We also processed the turbidity to see how much the increment in turbidity was during that passage of the boat. And we have the following preliminary observations. So wake waves from pleasure craft dissipate as they propagate. Thus, waves impacting the riverbank are larger if generated near the shore than if generated farther from shore. This is even on a small waterway like the Rideau. We could see a difference based on how far away the boat was. Each boat produced a maximum significant wave height when run at medium speed. This is because at medium speed, the boat is not planing and thus pushes more water and displaces more water. For the 3 boats that I'm talking about here, the medium speed was on the order of 20 kilometers per hour. Maximum significant wave heights produced by the small cruiser and the wake boat were similar, of order 15 centimeters, and this was larger than produced by the bass boat, which was on order 5 centimeters. The turbidity increment increased almost linearly with the significant wave height, which suggests shoreline erosion will be a function of wave height. And lastly, I did measure a recession of the bank over a year's time, 10 centimeters at the bank top and about half a meter at the bank bottom, suggesting the bank is getting steeper over time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rennie, and welcome back. I want you to remind you that on your 3rd visit, you become an honorary member of Transport Committee. So welcome back. Prochainement, next, we will go to Dr. Vermeer. Professor, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
All right, well, great. Thank you for inviting me and allowing me to present at this committee. I'm an Associate Professor of Environmental Science and Geography at Carleton University, and I have expertise in aquatic ecosystems and nearshore environments and how human activities can change nearshore environments. So as stated by my colleague, Professor Colin Rennie, we've been collaborating on a research project. So what I'm going to be talking about today, Colin discussed the experimental work we've been doing, but we've also just done some observational work about boat passes in the Rideau River. And this is part of a larger NSERC-funded project. So we've carried out observations of boat passes in the summer of 2023 at 2 sites in the Rideau River. The first was the W.A. Taylor Conservation Area at 3240 River Road in Ottawa, and the second was at Echolands Park, again on River Road. Both sites are popular with boating because they have marinas and or public boat launches that are available and free to use. So all of our observations of boat passes were made during the day, typically between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. in weather that's considered good for boating. So we weren't out when it was a rainy day, for example. So that's what these observations are based on. So our first observation based on access to information data is more that recreational boating is very popular in Ontario This is data from during the pandemic, but on average, 18,400 new pleasure craft licenses were issued each year in Ontario from 2019 onward. In the Rideau Waterway, as is likely for recreational boating elsewhere, the number of boat passes per hour was really site-specific and depended greatly on the weather and the day of the week, so if it was a weekend or a vacation, for example. And in the Rideau system, because it's popular for traveling longer distances, with the exception of cabin cruisers, most of the boats just stayed within one section of the river and didn't transit the lock stations. So over our 57 hours of observation, we observed 838 boat passes, so approximately 15 boat passes per hour on average. Boat passes reached a maximum of 72 boat passes per hour during the August Civic Long Weekend, and that also coincided with a fishing tournament near the site. The most common boat types we observed were personal watercraft, so smaller motorboats, 21% of all boat passes, followed by fishing boats, so like small aluminum boats at 18%. Cabin cruisers and yachts made up 14% of all boat passes, bow riders and deck boats 13%, and pontoons were 8.5% of the boat passes we observed. Water sport boats as a combined category, so water skiing boats, wakeboarding, or wake surf accounted for 13.5% of all boat passes. And wake surf boats alone were fairly rare, accounting for only 2% of all boat passes that we observed. We also noted that no water sports activities were observed in posted no wake zones on the canal, which were at our sites close to marinas, suggesting that recreational boaters were respecting the posted no wake zones near marinas. Similar to our experimental work, which Colin had mentioned, our observational study shows that cabin cruisers and wake surf boats produce the greatest wave heights in the Rideau Canal. So the purpose of this observational work was to compare to the experimental work in a more real-world situation how boats are actually passing through and using the canal. We're also currently investigating how recreational boating is influencing the underwater soundscape, because I'm also an ecologist and I'm interested in that, and there's very little data on that for freshwater. And while we need to collect more data and analyze it, it's very clear that recreational boating on the underwater soundscape is really the dominant anthropogenic noise in the Rideau waterway. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vermeer. Next, we will go to Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Brad Thompson. I'm the General Manager of McDonald Turkey Point Marina. I've been in the boating industry for 34 years full-time after 8 years part-time, starting at age 11. I'm here today regarding funding cuts to CAMBOAT's flare disposal program. CAMBOAT was formerly called the Canadian Power Squadron. The disposal of expired flares is a very concerning public safety issue. McDonald Turkey Point Marina alone has sold 438 flares this year, and we currently have over 500 expired flares in our possession. Customers bring these flares into our store, leave them at our door, and we've even found them in and around our garbage containers. Expired flares are hazardous goods that require special handling and disposal services. Not only are these expired flares a safety risk to our marina staff and disposal service we use, but they're also an extreme hazard to the environment, including lakes, landfills, and wildlife. Federal regulations require boaters to carry Transport Canada-approved flares on their boats. The flares are valid for 4 years from the date of manufacture. That's indicated on the flares. Considering the number of recreational boats across our country, the result is an extremely large quantity of expiring flares on a regular basis. With no cost-effective or regulated way to dispose of them, also on November 9th, 2021, the Transport Canada policy, acceptance of electronic visual distress signals, in lieu of pyrotechnic distress signals on pleasure crafts came into force. I'm uncertain how many boaters are aware of electronic signals as an alternative to flares because Transport Canada's Safe Boating Guide is dated July 2019, which is almost 5 years old. That's over 2 years before the policy came into effect. On behalf of the boaters and marine operators of Canada, we would like to see the federal funding reinstated to CanBoat for its flare disposal problem and also see Transport Canada update its safe boating guidelines both online and in print, advising boaters of the use of alternative electronic signals. I'm also here today representing McDonald Turkey Point Marina regarding Transport Canada in the Canadian Navigable Water Act, which has impacted our rights to control the waterways within the marina. McDonald Turkey Point Marina has been under current ownership since January 31st, 2005, with the marina itself dating back to the 50s. It was through hard work of man and machine in the 50s that the waterways were dug out to create the marina. McDonald Turkey Point Marina owns the bed of the waterways within the marina, as indicated in the following quotes taken from a Transport Canada letter dated February 6, 2020. The letter provides the official position of Transport Canada and supersedes all previous correspondence. The Government of Canada does not own the beds that form the channels part of Turkey Point Marina. The Navigational Water Act applies to the channels within the property known as Turkey Point Marina. The Canadian National Navigational Waters Act prevents the marina from having any control over its waterway. As a result, the Transport Canada letter, the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, in a letter dated March 4, 2024, has taken the following position. As quoted from that letter, the ministry is in the opinion that McDonald Turkey Point Marina may not restrict the public rights to fish in navigational waters, regardless of the ownership of the bed. Fishermen impede navigation in our channel rather than promote it. They can be a hindrance and a danger to navigation within our waterways. That on any given Saturday or Sunday during the summer, we can have upwards of 1,200 boats within our busy waterways. We also have an issue with troublesome former customers who have no trespassing orders issued against them to stay off the marina property. With access right to our waterways, they can still disturb our customers. It's nearly impossible to enforce these orders through local conservation officers and the Ontario Provincial Police due to the waterway access. McDonald Turkey Point Marina would like Transport Canada to review the marina's control over its waterways. Our industry is also dealing with the burden of luxury tax that has cost our industry millions due to reduction in boat sales, job losses, and business closures. Also, we sell a considerable volume amount of gas at the Marina Gas Bar, and the carbon tax is another additional expense to our customers. On behalf of all our customers and all those in the industry, we're asking that the government reconsider these taxes. Thank you for your time and attention to these details.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. 5 minutes and 2 seconds. Well done, sir. We very much appreciate that here at committee. Mr. Gulick, last but not least, sir, I'm turning the floor over to you. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
How's that? And can you hear me now?
We can, sir. The floor is yours.
Excellent. Trying not to really repeat Brad's comments too much about flare disposal. That's really what I'm here to talk about. And we are requesting that Transport Canada please provide funding for the safety education and recreational flare disposal program to Canadian Power and Sail Squadrons that was previously administered through CPS-ECP, now called CanBoat and Naughty Savoir, across Canada in both official languages. There is no other Canadian-wide program, and there are only a few local disposal options left. As members of the boating industry, we are keenly aware of how many boaters are carrying both the pyrotechnic distress flares required by Transport Canada regulations, as well as older flares that are now expired and that are potentially dangerous. Pyrotechnic distress flares require proper disposal, and in recent years, many disposal options through the municipal waste management and other government agencies like police and fire departments have now been discontinued. Many people do not know how to dispose of their expired flares and therefore do so inappropriately. The Transport Canada funded Canadian Power and Sail Squadron's Canboat Distress Flare Collection and Disposal Program has been very successful. It was national in scope in both English and French and has collected over 200,000 of any brand of flare that boaters brought to a CPS ECP Canboat Flare Disposal event. And those have been taking place since 2014. These events have been staffed by trained Canboat volunteers and are operated in concert with CIL Explosives, who properly handle the actual disposal and fund 40% of the cost of that disposal. Funding of these events under the Boating Safety Contribution Program was not renewed after 2022. And just FYI, the cost of disposing an average recreational flare is about $2.50. And then shipping will add another $1 to $1.50 to that amount. So you can see how much it actually costs to dispose of these things. We know that it's dangerous for municipal workers to find these discarded in household garbage, and environmentally, it's very dangerous as well as illegal for individuals to fire off flares unless there is a legitimate emergency. So you can understand the environmental effect, because really these flares, when they start to weep, I mean, what you're talking about is explosive, plain and simple. And we have had instances which have been reported where a worker has actually had a flare go off in their hand. Again, for the sake of safety of Canadian boaters nationwide, we ask that you please provide the funding to Canadian Power and Sail Squadrons, Canboat, Naughty Savoir for this unique program. Respectfully, John Gullick.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gullick. So we will begin our line of questioning today, and for that I will turn the floor over to Dr. Lewis. Dr. Lewis, you have 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you to all the witnesses for coming here today. My first question is to Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson, I've been hearing from various operators that they're suffering under increased costs, including utility costs. How much have you seen your utility costs and fuel costs increase over the past few years?
Sorry, you're breaking up there. I couldn't hear you at all. Sorry.
Okay. Let me start with another question then. How has the government regulations like the carbon tax or the Navigation Waters Act impacted on the marina and the boating industry?
Well, the boating industry with the Navigational Water Act directly affects private enterprise. We're a private marina here. It's not like, it's the middle of the lake. So we try to do our best to control what goes on in here. And sometimes we have people in here that do not want to act with respect. There's sometimes 2,000 or 3,000 people in here on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, and they want to come in with on a high rate of speed and create a large wake that can damage property, but also they'll stop and fish in the middle of the channel or play their music, right around dinner time where people are trying to enjoy their dinner with family. And unfortunately, at this time, the way the Navigational Water Act is read, and the way that some of the other, like the Ministry of Natural Resources, are interpreting it, they're allowing these people to stop and anchor right in our waterway. And, we don't have an entrance and an exit. We have one entrance, and the exit is the same here at McDonald Turkey Point Marina. So it makes it very difficult to have any kind of control in our waterways. And it's no different than any of the marsh and hunting clubs along the north shore of Lake Erie here in Long Point Bay. They're all posted, no trespassing, but now everybody can go in there and they can fish, where previously, they were capable to keep the folks out.
You mentioned the carbon tax. Can you elaborate on how the carbon tax is affecting your business?
Well, the carbon tax affects our business directly because we're a big fuel resale business. And here at the marina, what we're finding is people just are not using their boats as much as what they were. When they're coming over to the gas bar, they're not traveling. They're maybe not doing the visits down to Buffalo or up to Windsor, or maybe doing the part of the Great Loop or up to the Guardrich area. They're staying local. Instead of coming to the fuel dock every Saturday or Sunday afternoon, we're seeing them come once a month now, and they're only going up to beach and anchoring. And the biggest complaint is the cost of fuel and taxes and whatnot. And the carbon tax is a big thing. And a lot of people are really keeping their money in tight to their jeans, and they're not willing to spend it, and they're not going very far from home. And that affects tourism all up and down the lake.
Okay, my next question is for, thank you. My next question is for Mr. Gulick. With respect to the flares that you spoke about, how have the changes to the regulations over the years affected how expired flares are disposed of?
Well, essentially, all of the options, or pretty well all of the options, have been removed over the years. And I mean, we've been required to carry flares on most vessels for as long as I can remember, and that goes back like 50 years. And so you can imagine that if you have to carry 6 flares, and they're good for a 4-year period, then you got to get another 6 flares and then another 6 flares, and you'll get rid of them over time. But the problem is that those options that were available to boaters, for the most part, being able to drop them off at fire stations and police stations and so forth. And I'm not sure about the municipal special stuff, but that's all been removed. So there are no options.
Ever a time where government was more active in assisting boaters dispose of these expired flares, which could be an environmental and health hazard?
Government's never been active in assisting boaters in disposing of their outdated flares.
Okay.
To my knowledge.
And have the regulations changed recently? What has changed why this has become such a big problem?
What's changed is there aren't any options, or very few options available to get rid of your expired flares.
So what are people doing with them?
Doing it illegally.
What are people doing with them then?
Overboard, putting them in waste disposal, and they end up in landfill, which is not allowed. They're firing them off, which is not allowed. Or they're leaving them, like Brad has said, they're leaving them on the doorsteps of chandleries and marinas.
The problem with that?
Sorry?
What is the problem with that?
Well, where they leave them, then how do they get rid of them?
Is there a danger to it?
Yes. I mean, we're talking explosives here. When they start to weep, I mean, quite literally, in the last few years, I've had 2 instances where I've had to call the OPP and ask them to send bomb squad to a boater's residence to deal with flares that are starting to weep.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lewis, and thank you very much, Mr. Gulick. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Lauzon. À vous la...
Mr. Lauzon, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank all the witnesses for being here today. Lots of new information, very enlightening information. I will start with our friends from Quebec. Mr. Bélanger, you talked a lot about La Rivière-Richelieu, the place you represent, and the municipality. Tell us, what collaboration does your organization have with the municipality to arrive at those findings? We carried out vast consultations. The municipality trusts us because we are defending the river, and their concern is really protecting the river. And there's also follow-up with the quality of water and things like that. Thank you. You also said that 70% was pleasant boaters who were asking for change. We prepared the map for access because elected officials would like access points to be created for other types of crafts. And we realized that there was a pleasant surprise because even the mariners wanted to participate if there were other activities besides motorized crafts. So you're talking about canoeing, kayaking, and so on. You even talked about scuba diving. And you also said something that made me curious. You talked about recommendations, that it was complicated. Personally, with your municipality, have you started the process for the legislation of the Marine Act? We participated in the regulations in Saint-Marc and Saint-Charles, but that was at the end of the process. What happened in that specific case is that the process was completed. There was opposition from some groups of users, and this led to a scenario where everything could have collapsed. Yeah, tell us about opposition. Are you afraid sometimes that you could create a private club around those municipalities, which would lead to limiting cost, and overnight people become protectors without understanding the file, and there are exorbitant costs involved for cleaning the vessels inside and outside, without minimizing the impact of what could happen if I'm not saying you should not clean the vessels, but it could be the issue of access to vessels, which could be high. So we may be preventing tourism. Could you tell us more? Well, it's a federal responsibility because that's where there's complementarity with the province to make sure that municipalities are allowed to regulate the types of crafts that are used on waterways so that we avoid these private clubs forming. So there's a responsibility for Quebec access points, but the complexity with the regulations has led to a situation where the municipalities cannot diligently intervene, and with the necessary flexibility to reconcile protection of the waterways with what we can refer to as the social support capacity. What can the environmental group want? Let's not forget that when we are talking about waterways, you have the riverside and riverside inhabitants, and the municipalities represent the citizens, all the citizens. Well, I have other questions. We'll come back to that. Now, a question for you, Mr. Rene. Thank you once again for your presentation. It's always a pleasure to receive universities who come to talk to us on science-based information. You raised a new piece of information, something we never heard before. Very often we heard about 30 kilometers per hour, the shores, the wakeboards, and the big crafts. But you are coming up with the issue of accumulation of small waves that are at a wide scale that have a negative impact. That's something new. Can you tell us how you were able to measure the small waves and the fact that this could damage the environment?
Okay, thank you. Just to clarify, we did measure boat wake waves that were up to 15 centimeters from the pleasure crafts, including wake boats and the cruiser. And I wouldn't classify those as small waves necessarily. When they hit the bank, you actually see that there's they stir up the sediments quite a lot. But yes, I mean, if you tried to measure the bank recession from one of those waves, it would be immeasurable. It's too small. You do have to see it over a period of time, which is why I surveyed the bank both this year and last year, and we'll do it again next year. And in fact, we've looked at satellite imagery, and we've seen that it's been receding over a couple of decades at about the same rate. Does that help?
Yeah, that's help.
Yes.
That's help. Thanks.
Okay.
Monsieur Vermeer.
Mr. Vermeer, you also gave us statistics on the number of vessels that are increasing in the industry, in the marine industry. So you said there were 18,400 new navigation permits for pleasure boats, and each license has a vessel. That's lots of vessels. How can you tell us you didn't give us a timeline of the increase in the boats. For how long has there been a significant increase in the vessels?
Yes, thanks for the question. Yeah, we were looking, that was during the sort of COVID lockdown period, so 2019 and and onward, basically. So we didn't have data from before that. We're working on compiling that as well. But there's this perception that the number of recreational boats increased during COVID as people, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Lauzon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lauzon. Now, Mr. Basalou Duval, you have the floor for 6 minutes, sir. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for being here with us today. I will start with the Fondation Rivière. We had the opportunity before, this is the third meeting we're having to discuss the regulatory process. We discussed that on various occasions. Many people talked about wake boats as being a significant irritant. What I would like to know and what I would like to raise with you is the fact that when we use the roads in Quebec, be it municipal roads or the highways, sometimes there are trucks parked in various areas, school zones, there are speed limits. You can't just go anywhere. But when you get to a waterway or lake, if there's no locally imposed regulation, there's no rule. Do you think this is normal? And what could the solution be? There's the issue of signals. Municipalities can come up with some routes reserved for certain types of crafts. This should be the default solution. Indeed, we talked about having the right boat at the right place. Well, I'm just speaking. I may not be answering your question, but I'm speaking the way the ideas are coming to me. But my question was, shouldn't we have a national regulatory framework? I think you said that during your remarks. But what should it be based on? How should that be implemented? Indeed, we're talking about these types of paddle boards, and it's something we're seeing more and more. The paddle boards, the regulations concern the speed limit, but as we have seen on the public roads, we need a road reserved for different types of crafts. But this is not something we see on the waterways. We have the impression that on the waterway, this is not a public way, it's free for all and belongs to everyone. Question. So if there's a national regulatory framework, we should anticipate cohabitation and different uses. So there are some places where some uses are not allowed. I'm asking this question because in some context, sometimes having regulations, maybe there are 10,000 or so lakes, I don't know how many rivers we have. If we have to proceed one by one, it could take hundreds of years for us to complete them. So I'm wondering, at some point, if we want to be sure that the basic regulations, is it not necessary for us maybe to have some basic regulations? Well, the burden of proof lies on the person requesting it. So we need to show that there's a need for regulation. And if it's the contrary, and if we were to allow for a temporary form of regulation with an assessment of the impact, a social assessment, the social impact and the impact on the waterway, and then we can review such a regulation. We could then have national standards that will allow for a rapid implementation of the regulations. They can be validated, and the burden of proof would be to show that those regulations are not tailored, are not do the opposite, showing, which is the case now, showing that we need regulations. This takes me to the next issue that I wanted to address with you. When we talk about regulations and the regulatory process, I put this question to another witness, but I would like to know what you think. What is a reasonable timeline? Many people have said it takes 3-4 years, and sometimes 7 years from the beginning of the process to the end of the process, and sometimes it takes that long to have a rule. So if there is local will and a process starts, how long does it take? A maximum of 2 years. Why? Because 2 years is the time it takes. Well, elections are every 4 years, but when there's consensus with elected officials and officials, it took us 2 years. It takes 2 years. It takes another 2 years to implement. If there's a change during elections, if the people who are there leave, then we would have at least have gained a regulation. So I believe that 2 years is reasonable. A first year to test the mechanisms and a second year for more formal implementation. Thank you. My last question, time is running. You raised the notion of capacity, social capacity for waterways. You talked about the ecological aspect, biodiversity, security as well. How, well, is there a point where all these three different points get together? What do you think? Right now, the guide covers the issue of safety for users, but environmental capacity is something Mr. Rennie demonstrated a while ago. There's an environmental challenge. Now, for social capacity, we are talking about the capacity of the milieu to accept nuisances or to accept interactions between different types of vessels and uses. This is something we saw at Bonaventure, where the fishers do not have the same perception as the other types of users. So we need to strike a balance. That's what we mean by cohabitation. To do that, we need to come up with measures through, we need to look at surveys, satisfaction rates, and so on. It's only when we carry out such exercises that we'll understand how the people are receiving the regulations. So we need to add that in the process because it's a notion that doesn't currently exist. Thank you very much, Mr. Basalo Duval. It's 5:25, Mr. Bélanger and Mr. Massy Quentin. Thank you very much on behalf of all members of this committee. I know you have to leave. Thank you very much and good evening. Thank you.
The floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Well, there we go, Mr. Chair. I guess the witnesses that I wanted to ask questions of have to leave, so that's unfortunate. Which witnesses do we still have with us? I see Mr. Thompson and Mr. Gulick on Zoom.
You have Dr. Vermeer and Dr. Rennie. The two professors are here with us, sir.
Fantastic, fantastic. Okay, thank you for the view of the room there. Thanks to the IT folks. And thanks to all of our witnesses for joining us for this study. It's a really interesting one. And I was remarking at one of our last meetings about how different the context is across Canada because we're talking about recreational boating and its impact on aquatic environments. And a lot of that seems to be a result of high density of use. And there are many parts of northern Canada where the density of use by recreational boaters is exceptionally low. And so I would assume that the impacts are consequently low as well. But listening to Dr. Rennie and Dr. Vermeer's testimony, it sounds like there's really a proven link between intensive use by pleasure craft and these impacts on shorelines and on the aquatic environment. In your view, is the extent of the impact worth a concerted federal approach to regulating recreational boating to minimize those impacts?
Do you want to take that on?
You can go with that.
Well, as an academic, I'm always much better at the science and the engineering than the policy. I think that's more in your purview. But from what I've seen, I think a general understanding that boatway can impact shorelines, both in terms of bank erosion and impact on species. So, for example, Professor Vermeer has been looking at impact on nests of shoreline birds. If there were a policy that tried to minimize those impacts, I certainly would support it.
And the findings that you've come up with based on your research, are those fairly consistent with what you see across the academic literature, or are there varying findings from the research community when it comes to the impact on aquatic environments?
I think I can say what we've seen is consistent with previous literature, yes.
Okay. Dr. Vermeer, do you want to add your thoughts on that?
Yep, I'll just add, yeah, I agree it's consistent across the literature, but there's a lot of factors that go into the impact, and a lot of that has to do with shoreline habitat as well. If the shoreline has its natural vegetation there, including aquatic plants, the impact tends to be less because those reduce wave energy. So in terms of regulating boats for shoreline erosion, I think it's also important to think about the shoreline itself and what that looks like in terms of its vegetation, but also its slope and topography and things like that.
And looking at other jurisdictions that have experienced these issues, this study builds on a previous study that was proposed by my colleague, Mr. Barcelou-Duval, that looked at shoreline erosion on the St. Lawrence River. So looking at other jurisdictions around the world that have experienced this kind of erosion and have connected it to recreational boating, are there some jurisdictions that you feel are managing those effects in a more proactive or a more progressive way than Canada is currently?
I can't say I have an answer to that, but that's a very good question that's worth pursuing. Last time I did an extended brief after the meeting based on questions that emerged, and I sent that back into the committee. It might be worth us doing a little bit of look at that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I don't know off the top of my head either. But I do know there's sort of maybe not jurisdictions, but other academics, I guess, looking at different options where you need to harden shorelines. Natural shorelines are always the best option and conserving that vegetation. But in instances where shoreline hardening needs to be done to stop erosion, people are studying different methods that can sort of still provide that shoreline stability, but increase the biodiversity around it, as opposed to just, say, riprap, or a plain concrete wall.
Okay, thank you. And turning now to Mr. Thompson and Mr. Gulick, both of you gentlemen mentioned the FLAIR program and your concerns around that. I'm just wondering how the government could best finance any programs around collecting and disposing of flares from recreational boaters. And it seems to me like an obvious approach would be to add a deposit so that there's some incentive for either for boaters to return them properly and have them disposed of properly, or to incentivize someone else to pick them up from the beach or from the garbage and dispose of them properly. Has there ever been a discussion about a deposit program similar to one we have for soft drink containers or the sort?
Not that I'm aware of. And that's part of the problem, is because there is no way of funding, like you have suggested, having a deposit or whatever, no way of funding the collection and disposal of flares, and also the cost of the marinas and the chandleries, like they have to have bunkers to be able to, store these flares while they're waiting to, ship them off to, one of the manufacturers for disposal. And, there's a cost there as well. And so, it's very difficult to get people to even think about that, let alone really do something about it. And, the funding that, we introduced this program, by we, I mean Canadian Power and Sail Squadrons, CanBoat. We introduced this program in 2014 because there was a growing need to be able to dispose of these flares. And we got funding for that program over 8 years from the Boating Safety Contribution Program. But that funding stopped last year. Even though we applied, we were not accepted. And my understanding is this year we reapplied for next year and the 2 years following that the program had
Thank
been
you.
put on hold.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gulick, and thank you, Mr. Backrack. Next, we have Mr. Lawrence. Mr. Lawrence, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and the majority of my questions will be for Mr. Gulick and Mr. Thompson. I'll start with you, Mr. Thompson. When we are talking, we've heard a lot of talk about the luxury tax, but in actually a lot of our testimony, it should really be renamed the union workers and small business taxes. It's had a tremendous impact on workers who construct these boats, a tremendous impact on those individuals who are involved in the tourist industry. Would you agree with my analysis and, quite frankly, the testimony of other witnesses?
Yes, I would agree with that. It's really affected, it hasn't affected the rich as far as we see. The main concern here is affected the middle class, the working man of Canada, the working man and ladies. Some of these pontoon boats we're seeing now are over $250,000. And basically, that's just a recreational Saturday, Sunday afternoon boat. It's not, something that they're going to go on a 2-week vacation cruise on. These folks that were selling the boats at the dealerships, renting the docks like myself at the marinas, right down to the grass cutters, to the boat detailers, there's been jobs lost, businesses closed, and sales of larger yachts have been going down south. So it has been a burden on the industry. And I just hope that there is some sort of a resolution that everybody can chime in here and that something can be done to help everyone out. And let's get things rolling and moving in a positive way. Let's get the economy going. Let's sell some boats. Let's keep some people employed.
Thank you. And I'll move on from there to discuss the carbon tax, which we've also had testimony on, that it's impacting local economies, hurting small business owners, leading to sometimes the layoffs of unionized workers, which has created a significant challenge. Now, the theory behind the carbon tax goes something like this, in that it's supposed to, that's what it does, is increase the cost of fuels, and so that people are encouraged to buy alternatives. Are there currently economic viable alternatives to utilizing fossil fuels in the recreational boating industry?
No, not at this time, not for recreational boating. I mean, obviously sailboat is wind generated, primarily. But at this time, we don't have near the infrastructure for the electric boats that are coming on board. We just simply do not have the hydro infrastructure for the charging mechanisms. At this point, and where we are at, especially here in Turkey Point, there is nothing. Fuel is the mainstay right now.
Thank you. And I want then go on to the current flare issue, which is a problem, it sounds to me, largely created by the federal government, which mandates these flares. And I think you said that you need 6, they last for 5 years, they need to be on every boat. And then, so while the government's saying, yeah, you have to have these, they're not giving any solution to what to do with them after 5 years. Am I correct there, Mr. Thompson?
Yes, you're correct. In the past, and John can back this up, Canadian Power Squadron, we would have the Tillsonburg Power Squadron, Port Dover Power Squadron. They would have events here on weekends, multiple weekends throughout the summer, where people could come and get information on their courses that they could register for, and they could also drop off their expired flares here at the marina. And actually, all our other marinas in the area would advertise this event, and they would also have their customers bring the expired flares to our location, or it could be at another marina up the lake. We all work together on that.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. And Mr. Gulick, would you also agree with my synopsis that this is a problem created by a mandate that the federal government's putting in place, but then leaving boat owners out on the lurch by not giving them any disposable alternatives?
I would say yes. The mandate is there. They have introduced, and Brad's talked about that, a way of reducing the number of flares that you have to carry, but you still have to carry, even if you've got electronic flares or if you've got, a VHF or a cell phone with cell service, you still have to carry a certain number of flares, and they're only good for 4 years.
Just quickly, because my time is running short here, I don't quite understand the necessity to have flares if you're in an area with cell service. Simply having a cell phone, I think, would solve the problem, would it not?
Well, it doesn't appear to have. They've reduced the number required by half if you've got a VHF or a cell, but they haven't reduced the number entirely.
My time, right, Mr.
Your
Chair?
cell phone won't work at Long Point Lighthouse. Just
It is your
information.
time. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much,
One
Mr.
chair to
Lawrence. I'm
another there.
always looking forward to giving you more time, however, Mr. Lawrence. Mr. Yakino, prochainement, la parole est à vous.
Thank you,
5 minutes.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Gulick, I have a few questions for you. You've said a few times that the Canadian government should do more, especially imposing this luxury tax. So tell me, if you are to buy a boat, I guess you understand that there's money to be dispersed. So on average, anybody that buys something, if I were to go buy a Ferrari and I'm planning to take it out and after a year I got to do an oil change or I got to change the brakes, I'm expecting to not pay $50 or $100 to go get an oil change. I'm expecting to pay close to the thousands. So it's expected of me to understand that by having a luxury item, I need to be having a luxury life that I have money to be able to spend. Do you agree with me?
I leave this to Brad. I'm just dealing with flares. I'm not dealing with the luxury tax.
Well, you talked about the luxury tax before, so here I'm coming back to you because you're saying the government of Canada imposed this luxury tax when you responded to my colleague across. So I'm going to say, pardon?
Sorry, I did not mention the luxury tax. That came from Brad. It's not in my statement.
Sorry about that. Who was it that mentioned it?
Brad Thompson.
Mr. Thompson, can you reply? Can you
thank
reply
you.
to that? Sorry, sir.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
So the same question I was asking your, Mr. Gulick. What do you have to say about that?
About the luxury tax?
Yes.
Well, it's definitely a cost, obviously, right? Like everybody knows they're expensive. It doesn't matter if you have.
So you want the federal government to pay up for a luxury that a Canadian wants to get? So I'm going to ask you a question. Do you believe that the government of Canada shouldn't support the 1 million Canadians that have access to the dental program and support more people to buying out boats because of the luxury
what the industry is saying, and Rick Lazell mentioned it in his testimony, I believe, last week, is a lot of the sales are being lost because a lot of the boats are being purchased south of the border. And I can't speak to your relevance there about dental care and all that. You know what? That's not.
No,
not
I'm
my
just
business.
I'm just highlighting because you're saying the federal government doesn't do enough. So if I go according to your
the federal government has cost sales of vessels over the $250,000 mark. They have prevented ongoing work. Businesses has closed. They have closed their doors because of this. That's what we were mentioning. That's what Mr. Lazell mentioned from Boating Ontario last week. Thanks.
well, if I'm spending $250,000 on a vessel, then I think I should be ready to absorb other costs, other supplement costs. It's like buying a house, practically close to buying a house, I would say. So it's only normal that there's going to be extra costs. So you continuously saying that the federal government is not
Yeah, 'cause
doing
when you
enough,
buy a-
I think it's a
when you
bit
buy a house, you don't pay
outstretched.
10%.
Mr. Chair, I'll leave the rest of my time to my colleague Stéphane Lauzon.
Parfait. Monsieur Lauzon, à vous la parole.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Maybe one last question for Mr. Thompson. You say you are a manager of a private marina. Is that what you said?
It's not being translated.
No translation?
On va juste attendre pour vérifier si...
We will wait to see if it's a matter of a delay. Is it working now? Can you hear me? It seems to be working. You told us you are a manager of a private marina.
Is we're going to suspend for just 1 minute to make sure that translation is functioning properly.
Okay.
Goes to show how important the work that our interpreters do every single day, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank them. Monsieur Lauzon, à vous la parole.
Mr. Lauzon, you have the floor. Mr. Thompson, you said you are a manager of a private marina. How many vessels do you have in your marina?
We have 750 slips, and we have 127 year-round cottages on our waterway, and we have a forward pad boat ramp. So on a nice Saturday and Sunday afternoon, there could be anywhere to 1,200 boats using our waterways. We're approximately 83 acres.
Oh, combien de cases sont libres que vous n'avez pas louées cet été?
How many are free that you did not rent out this summer?
We only we were I believe 92% occupied this summer for.
Sur quoi qu'on se base quand on a...
What do you rely on? When I had 90% in school, that was a great mark. What are you relying on to say that there's been a drop in customers? Do they come tell you that they'll be putting less fuel than last week because there's a fuel tax? Do they really tell you about that?
Yes, my staff and myself, that is the biggest complaint that we get is the cost of fuel.
OK. Puis là, vous nous parlez de la classe moyenne.
And you are talking about the middle class, the Canadian middle class, earning about $90,000 a year, and they are able to buy a vessel costing more than $250,000 in addition to paying a luxury tax. What's the cost of fuel for a vessel that costs about $250,000 to $300,000? What does it take to fill the tank of a vessel?
It all depends. If it's a pontoon boat, it could be $250. If it's an offshore fishing boat, it could be more than $500.
OK, ben, 250 piastres pour...
$250 to fill the tank. If we are looking at 5% of the luxury tax for the carbon tax, do you think that this has an impact? Are you sure that we could put that in a report?
The customers have
Ah,
spoken,
désolé, on n'a plus de temps pour répondre. Désolé, on est...
Sorry, we don't have time for your answer.
Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Barcelou Duval. À vous la parole.
Mr. Barcelou Duval, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Rennie, for being back here in the committee. I really appreciated your testimony last time, and the same goes for this time. I understand that you tested the Rideau Canal here in the region. My question for you, you said that between the wakeboard and the cruisers, those are the two main crafts that cause the greatest waves. In terms of ratios, how can we compare a wave caused by a smaller craft to that caused by the wakeboard? Is it 1:10? What is the difference? Can we quantify the difference? Have you carried out that exercise?
Thank you for the question. So we saw that the waves from the wakeboat and the cruiser were similar in magnitude, 15 centimeters or so for the significant wave height. And the bass boat was about a third of that, 5 centimeters. We also measured the increase in turbidity for every wave that passed. And we found that there was nearly a linear increase. It's actually slightly more than linear. 1.1 was the exponent. So this means that even if the boat is a smaller wave, we have an understanding of how much sediment it kicks up. So we could do a cumulative estimate of the impact of those smaller waves, as well as the cumulative impact of the assessment of the larger waves. That's a little bit of an empirical exercise. What we prefer to do, which is what we're going to do, is make a numerical model with the data we have and calibrate the model with that data and then apply it to different boat types. And we'll be able to have a better estimate of the impact of each type of boat.
Quand vous parlez de l'augmentation de la turbidité,
When you talk about the increase in the turbidity of water when a vessel passes, the cumulative effect, for example, is there a linear relationship or a relationship that could be exponential? How is the curve? I just want to have an idea of how it looks.
But how do I know the turbidity related to the boat type? Just the key of the question, Notre Fosse, s'il vous plaît.
How would you qualify the curve, like the cumulative?
Linear, but it's a slightly increasing fit. So, in other words, as the waves get bigger, the turbidity increases even larger to some extent. But it's,
Merci beaucoup, Mr. Barcelou-Duval.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barcelou-Duval.
Okay, Mr.
Sorry for that.
Bachrach. Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 2.5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll pick up where I left off talking about the flares, because it seems like the kind of problem that should be easily solvable. Here you have a product that you don't want just ending up in trash cans or on the beach at marinas. And what we need is some leadership, and we need some sort of a program to ensure that these are disposed of properly. And when you buy tires, you pay an eco fee on top of the cost of the tires, which allows you to take those tires back to registered facilities, which are compensated for the task of collecting those tires and disposing of them properly. So to both of our witnesses that spoke on this topic, I just wonder if you would support moving towards such a system, which would require regulation, but it wouldn't necessarily require a subsidy through taxation from the non-boating public. It could be it could be financed by the users of the products themselves. Is that something you'd support?
I would say yes. It's something that we've talked about at the Standing Committee on Recreational Boating at Transport Canada for a number of years. However, it's going to require an intervention, I think, by the government to make that happen. But in the meantime, I mean, we've still got this program, and even if you were to introduce now a fee that goes along with the flares that are sold today, what about the flares that have been sold over the last 50 years? Because, I mean, we've been collecting flares that quite literally have come from the World War II era, and, I mean, there's no fund to pay for those. So, I mean, I think if you're going to do something, I would applaud, but I think there needs to be a balance while an introduction of a service fee comes into place against, an effort like ours, which will actually collect any flares from any boater coast to coast to coast, regardless of their age and type.
I support the Power Squadron ideas from the past as well, because right now I really do not have a safe place to store any more of these flares, and we find them weekly. Now we're in our off season, but it just becomes a danger, a hindrance, and I keep them away from my staff, but it is a very dangerous situation we're in here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bachrach. Next, we have Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours. 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses that are here. Mr. Thompson, Turkey Point Marina is actually only about 45 minutes from my house, and it's a beautiful part of Ontario, and I've had the pleasure of being in that area many times over the years as a young kid and also more recently. And so you mentioned that up to 1,200 boats is what you have in and around your marina at sort of the summer peak. And so I wanted to, it struck me because we had some witnesses at this committee last week who indicated that on a lake that has a surface area of about 102 square kilometers, that the maximum number of boats that should be allowable is 31. So I wanted to run that by you and see what you thought about that. Does that make any sense at all?
No, like we store, like, so on any given evening, there's approximately 750 boats in the marina. That's how many docks that we have that we're able to house boats. And then there's 127 cottages that also have slips at their property that can use our channels to access Lake Erie. And then also we have the boat ramp. So yes, on any given Saturday, on a nice day, we'll have 1,200 boats. I'm not sure. I don't know anything about that study, sir. Thanks for the question, but we can certainly handle our boats here. Mind you, they're doing, they're respecting waterways and transversing the channel slowly and whatnot.
Yeah, I was just trying to draw the comparison that obviously at that rate, it was 3.3 square kilometers per boat, and if you were to extrapolate that based on your volume of boats, you'd cover a quarter of Lake Erie. So that makes no logical sense. You mentioned, of course, that over the last, let's maybe look at the last three seasons or 3 years, 2002, 22, 23, 24. Do you have any specifics on the data or the number of boats or traffic or days of use that you've had, like just to sort of draw that visual as to the curve of use?
Curve of use in our area basically is June, July, and August. Once we hit Labor Day, it drops. We were very busy during the COVID years. Coming out of the COVID years, it did slow down a little bit, but basically those summer months are our curve, our busy curve.
Are boaters, because you indicated, of course, some of the costs that are associated with boating that is impinging upon use. Are you seeing, in 2024, this past summer versus previous summers, maybe less time on the water, less use? Like, what are you seeing? The impact of that?
We're definitely seeing less use, as in distance traveled. Absolutely, that is a fact. Boaters out of our marina, they're not going as far. They're not taking the trips to Erie, Pennsylvania, or Windsor, or Buffalo, or Leamington, or Fort Erie. They're staying local.
And why is that? What are the factors that are contributing to that?
Basically cost. Yep. Our boaters are struggling right now, and the price of fuel, and then you go, also, just like everything else, it doesn't matter if you have a car or anything, you have insurance costs. So the cost of the recreational boating has gone up. The fuel costs have gone up. Cost of purchasing boats have gone up. So it has affected them, and they're just not going as far.
And so among those costs, I think you've indicated the carbon tax, luxury tax. There's been any other cost factors. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yep. Carbon tax is probably the biggest one that we hear on a weekend basis when the people pull up to the pumps. And to be honest with you, they do complain about the price of fuel.
Thank you. So to recap, obviously, the carbon tax and the price of fuel is having impact on the length of trip and the boating industry and the volume of business that you're seeing at your marina, and we know that we can extrapolate that to other boating areas of Ontario and the country. And so thank you for your testimony, Mr. Thompson. I just want to, on behalf of the committee, apologize for the disrespectful way in which you were treated by some of the members of this committee in the last line of questioning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muse. Next, we'll go to Mr. Badaway. The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to direct my questions to Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson, first of all, I want to say thank you and congratulations. I know how your marina operates. Greetings from down at Sugarloaf Marina Harbor down in Port Colborne. A lot of the people that are coming along Lake Erie, the reason why they're coming along Lake Erie is because of people like yourself, the operation that you have, as well as those ones that are right along that north shore of Lake Erie. So thank you for that. My questioning is going to go more toward Mr. Thompson, what we can do for you. And of course, not only when I say we, the federal government, but also in partnership with the province and the municipal government. So questions, and I'm also the co-chair of the Great Lakes Task Force. So a few of my questions are going to be relative to the environment, which I'm going to start off with. So the environmental footprint, the environmental impact that you have on the lake. Does the marina take any measures to protect Lake Erie's water quality, as well as any green initiatives that are planned for the marina? And finally, with respect to environmental, any marine life protection as it relates to the wildlife and fish habitats in your specific area?
Actually, McDonald Turkey Point Marina is an elite Clean Marine member in good standing of Boating Ontario. We are always cleaning our waterways, picking up debris. We always get a lot of floating debris in and whatnot, and also garbage, believe it or not, from the land that ends up in our waterways through storm drains and whatnot in the area. So there is, we do have a big initiative. We're also work very closely with the Erie Bassmasters, where I was doing shoreline cleanups, and also all of our tournament events here. They're involved with the Long Point Anglers Association. They're all catch and release bass tournaments. I believe there's 8 or 9 now out of our marina. It's in our best interest to take care of nature, take care of these fish and wildlife in our area, because that's people come to see that and respect that, and we have to do our part to respect it as well.
Great, well done. Second part of questioning, Mr. Thompson, is with respect to the operational and infrastructure capacity that you may require within your operation. I see that your capacity right now at the marina is about 750 slips. You have a few that are covered, a few that aren't. Full service marina. Once again, congratulations on that. I know how much work that is. Being the mayor of a community that has a marina over in Port Colborne, I can appreciate the work that you and your team have to do to keep that up. So with that, both during peak season and off-peak season, are you looking at expanding your facility in any way?
We're not looking to expand it right now. We do have room,
Or improve?
We're always improving the marina, whether it be the roadways or the shorelines. But right now, a big thing for us is just maintenance, status quo. We went through several years, as you would know, with high water, you know, and that took a burden, especially on our shorelines, you know, and we fought through getting permits and everything. So we're on the rebound here now, but it is heavily maintenance is, you know, that's the biggest game right now that we're looking forward.
Okay, and the funding that you have coming in, is it all basically on you as with the operation from both the operational capital side, or do you have any participation from your municipal government or any other partners?
We are on our own, so it's all the money that we would collect from our tenants and customers. We have no federal, no municipal in any way.
Nothing. Okay, and with respect to your seasonal, and again, unfortunately, we have the cold months, and of course, there's the off season. With that, are there any other planned infrastructure improvements that you're looking at in the future, challenged with, especially when it comes to your capital? And of course, sometimes your capital offsets your operational if you're financing any debt. Is there anything planned? Question one. And question two, what wouldn't be covered under your current base of revenue that you actually collect during your peak season, and I guess during your off season with storage and things like that? What would be your ratio and difference in terms of the revenues that you need?
Well, we need a lot of revenue, like I was mentioning before. I had a question with the electric vehicles coming. We don't have proper hydro service. A matter of fact, it's to my knowledge that the Turkey Point area itself does not have the infrastructure. So we would have to fund that on our own at this point. And unfortunately, that is not an option for the marina. So moving forward, like I say, we're just going to maintain right now until infrastructure can be upgraded in our area.
Mr. Thompson, and it's a recommendation to you. You know, one of the reasons why we put in place, for example, the luxury tax and the carbon tax and things like that is because we reinvest those dollars into different services, whether it be offsetting property taxes, water bills from the infrastructure side, or other services that, you know, both municipal and personal. But I don't want to get into that. What I'm most interested in is where some of that help can actually be placed on you in marina operation, or anybody for that matter, so that way some of those dollars can actually be contributing to you as well as it does with municipalities and Canadians. So if I can ask that you can pass that on to us, that would be wonderful.
Okay. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson.
You know what?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mr. Thompson.
Sorry. We can, you know what? We can always use that money for maintenance dredging, you know, making our canals deeper. Drinking water, you know, is a big source here. I make the drinking water right now. So hydro, channel access, deeper water, and drinking water.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Thank you very
Mr.
much,
Thompson.
Mr.
Great
Badaway.
job.
Next, we have Mr. Viss, I believe. Mr. Viss, the floor is yours. 5 minutes, sir.
Nice to see you today. To my fellow Brad, for the middle class and those working hard to join it, just to clarify, do they enjoy paying the carbon tax at your marina?
No, they do not.
I just need to hear that one more time. For the middle class and those working hard to join it, do they appreciate paying the carbon tax at your marina?
No, they do not.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Rennie, I was intrigued by your previous research in British Columbia on scour in salmon spawning habitat. I represent the majority of the Fraser River in British Columbia, and nowhere else in Canada have we experienced natural disasters in recent times. Part of that we can attribute to climate change, but part of that we can also attribute to the federal government draining an ancient lake that was fished and lived on by the Stalo people, and that's Sumas Lake. Are you familiar with Sumas Lake?
Familiar with Sumas Lake, yes.
Yeah. Have you conducted any research on the major natural disasters or are aware of any of the studies on the impact that recreational boats have had on the salmon habitat post-flood?
That I can say no. So recreational boating, salmon habitat, Fraser River, post-flood. No, I have not been out there since the flood. I have ongoing collaboration with professors at SFU and UBC, so Jeremy Venditti and Michael Church. And we have studied things like sediment transport on the Fraser for many years.
Okay.
But I have not done a study post-flood in
darn.
that region.
Mr.
I appreciate
Vermeer,
the
have you?
opportunity. I would.
I haven't either. No.
Okay. Well, that's too bad. We deal with a lot of interesting dynamics between the recreational fishery, the indigenous fishery, the commercial fishery, the lack of infrastructure that our communities received. All these big factors are sort of at play on the Fraser River now, and unfortunately, we haven't received any infrastructure money to protect our waterways post flood, and especially our critical salmon habitats. But I guess that will have to wait for another time. But just one final question for you as we wrap up. And for those in the middle class and those working hard to join it, as we heard earlier, they're very concerned about the carbon tax. Has the carbon tax impacted the number of boats on the Ottawa River and the impact it's had on soil turbidity?
I would know whether the carbon tax has impacted boating on the Ottawa or the Rideau.
Okay.
Do you have any idea?
No. I have no data on that. We don't know.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. Since 2019, has recreational boating in any way decreased along the Ottawa River when you conducted your earlier studies?
Well, as was said earlier, there did appear to be an increase in boating during COVID, and that was because people could be outside.
Okay.
So since 2019, I think there's been an increase.
Okay. And just to clarify, that's had an ecological impact on local salmon, or sorry, not salmon out here, but on local fish species?
I'll let you do the ecology one.
No, I don't. Well, we don't know that. We've been collecting data on it, but so our project's 1 year old now, but we don't have anything before COVID or before the carbon tax to compare to. And in terms of boating, I mean, we're doing our study in the Rideau Waterway, which is a pretty modified waterway for canal construction.
Thank you.
So and there's a lot of factors going on there, including water drawdown and things like that in the winter. It'd probably be hard to attribute.
One quick question: Has recreational boating impacted our national historic site on the Rideau Canal? Is that eroding the banks of the Rideau Canal quickly?
Erosion, you might know better. Yeah.
I think the study we're doing is evaluating that, and we have seen some bank recession, yes.
Yeah.
Attributing it solely to pleasure craft use, of course, is the challenge, and that's why numerical modeling will help.
Yeah.
I could just maybe add, a lot of the Rideau Canal shoreline has been hardened too by property owners concerned about erosion on their property, so they're investing their money into it. So and they, in their opinion, recreational boating is part of the story there.
It's something British Columbians, even when they visit the national capital, really love to visit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Viss. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Lauzon. À vous la parole. 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Lauzon, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair.
I just earned my colleague Viss is now aware about the environment. So, and climate change. So let me ask you a question about climate change. In your study, dans vos études, vous avez parlé.
In your studies, you talked about the studies on the damage that could happen to the shorelines. In your study, did you look into anything that has to do with climate change and the increase of waves that we could see?
Good question. I would say that no, we have not at this point specifically looked at climate change. I will say that in the study on the St. Lawrence, which is not the Rideau, we are looking at changes in possible wave due to wind events. But for the study on the Rideau, no, we have not looked at that.
Vous nous avez aussi.
You also talked about pollution from noise. Did you also assess the noise? I am a good user of the marinas in Ontario, and I also use the marinas on the Ottawa River, Rockland, Rideau, and so on. One of my favorite restaurants are situated there, so I've had the opportunity to see this. You provided important data. The wade boats are not damaged by the marina because the regulations are respected. Have you looked into other places where boats do not respect the 300-meter distance from the shore where there could be any damage? Could there be damage there for the wake boats?
I'd say for the respecting, that's what we observed is the boats were respecting the no wake zone near the marina. And that's something we plan on looking at this summer, just broadening that. Still in the Rideau River, but other sections where they have posted no wake zones versus not posted, and to see if there's sort of a clear decrease in wakes when there's a posted sign.
And about the noise?
The noise, I might have, if we're going to look elsewhere, is that what you were asking? Sorry, I might have missed.
In your study?
Yeah.
You been aware about the noise that people that they were complaining about the noise of the boat?
No, I think I've heard that anecdotally. People, that's I guess I don't have good data to support that, but my own talking to people, my own personal opinion is with the wake surf boats, they're also loud, and the music goes up automatically when the surf's up, and in the wake boat we did our test on, wake surf boat we did our test on, for example, there's a button you push to make it even louder, the engine louder. So that does bother certain people on the waterway, I've heard. Yeah.
OK, là, on a vu des centaines.
We saw hundreds and hundreds of boats pass by, 62 boats per hour that you assess. We know that there's police surveillance in the waterways. Maybe it's something that you've not seen. I checked twice this summer. Does this have an impact on the results when there's police surveillance? Did you think about including that? I know it's an indirect question from your study, which also has a direct impact on the studies. So does repression help you in your studies?
I looked back to Steve. He said no.
No.
He
Yeah.
doesn't know.
Yeah. I don't think we saw any police on the waterway. Yeah, in the Rideau, we didn't really, and we did see, I think, some conservation officers around fishing, but yeah.
Je pense qu'on a plus de temps, mais je peux continuer.
I don't think I have time left. May I continue? No, 20 seconds.
OK, vous m'avez parlé de la
You talked about the diversity of boats. You talked about fishing boats, motorized boats. how are all these pleasure boats harmonized compared to what the other witnesses came and talked about? How did you see all these families being harmonized? Do we need a specific canal for a specific category of boats? Is there good harmonization?
Observational study.
Well, yeah, I don't know. They definitely have. I don't know what the answer is to that, but I'd say overall, what we have seen in the Rideau River is most people get along and most people are polite, and most people, if they see someone canoeing, slow down. Yeah, and I believe it was one of the other witnesses who left. Is that it's just a few, the odd person. So overall. Boaters are very respectful, I'd say, to one another, and that's what we witnessed.
Donc, on gère l'exception.
So we only manage the exceptions.
Deal with it because all the rest seems to be a big family. That's what I feel.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Lauzon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lauzon.
I want to turn over to you, sir, to make sure that there's no audio-visual issues that need to be dealt with.
No, I just wanted to respond to that question about harmonization. I live on the Trent Severn system, and I see boats coming past here every day, and I would say, regardless of size, type, etc., that there is a great deal of harmony and respect amongst boaters.
Thank you, Mr. Gullick. I appreciate that, and I concur. Monsieur Barcel-Duval, à vous la parole. 2 minutes et demie, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Barcel-Duval, 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. The question I have for Mr. Rennie, you mentioned that you measured the speed of the strongest wave for some boats. And you said sometimes by going faster, there's a moment where there's floating over water and there's less waves produced as from some. And you also mentioned that from one boat to another, that's the question I have for you. I imagine that from one craft to another, from one model to another, the threshold from which we start seeing the wave declining is variable. Am I mistaken?
No, that's true. I did say that they were all on the order of 20 kilometers per hour for the maximum wave, but certainly there is variance between the boat type. I was just giving a kind of a number to get a sense of what speed might produce the maximum wave.
Je vous soulève ça parce que
I've raised that point because I've had people, mayors, or organizations who wanted regulations on waterways, and they are wondering how they can come up with regulations which objective is to come up with the least waves, whereas they are looking at the speed and the strength of the engine. So it's difficult given that each craft has a different speed and produces its own wave. So will this require that we change the toolbox for regulations? How can we limit the effect or impact of the waves? How can we obtain the results through regulation?
I agree with that. One possibility is to make sure that the maximum speed is below the threshold for all the boat types. So, for example, on the Rideau, if there's no wake zones, but there's also less than 10 kilometers per hour zones, that's one possibility, I think, to make sure that posted speed works for all the different boat types.
C'est une solution qui
That is a solution that has been tried in some areas and generated some resistance because they feel that 10 kilometers an hour is slow. And if we were to apply that in waterways throughout the country, it's becoming complicated. Is there a compromise that is acceptable to protect the biodiversity and acceptable by the boaters? What will that compromise be?
You're heading me into the policy realm, which I said I wanted to avoid. But if I were to devise such a policy, I might look at boat size and draft. And so, in other words, it's the displacement of the boat. So yes, I think you could have a different speed limit for different types of boats.
Merci beaucoup, Mr. Barcel-Duval. And finally, for today, we turn the floor over to Mr. Bachrach for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks again to our witnesses for engaging with us on these topics. And, you know, we've heard from witnesses that are primarily concerned with the impact of recreational boating on the aquatic ecosystem, on shorelines, that sort of thing. And we've heard from people from the recreational boating community who are concerned about several topics, including, you know, today we heard about flares, we've heard about the cost of boating, we've heard about infrastructure needs, those sorts of things. And I guess my question for Mr. Thompson and Mr. Gulick is what they make of the concerns around the impact of recreational boating on shorelines in the aquatic environment, and the idea of improving regulation of recreational boating to minimize those impacts. Like, it seems like the question isn't whether there's an impact occurring. You know, obviously on lakes and rivers where there's high boat traffic, there's going to be impacts. It's really around how do you govern recreational boating effectively? What order of government is best positioned to provide regulation and enforcement? And what does that look like? And is it embraced by the recreational boating community? You know, I imagine some recreational boaters are traveling, you know, an hour or two to recreate on a lake or a river. And their view of the situation is probably quite different from someone who lives on the bank of that river or the shore of that lake and boats in the local vicinity and experiences the impacts in a different way. What do you make of this whole conversation around environmental impacts from recreational boating?
There's no question that there's shoreline erosion impacts from recreational boating. I think the most important thing that needs to be looked at are speed zones, no wake zones. We struggle with that right here at McDonald Turkey Point Marina. I have 4x8 sheets of plywood that say no wake, no throttle. I probably have 8 of them around the facility. Mother Nature is another problem, though. Shoreline erosion, the biggest problem is it has to be protected. The shorelines have to be protected, whether it's armor stone, in environmental ways, other ways of doing it. But Mother Nature and some big storms causes more destruction at this marina than any boat going up and down its channel or in our facility. So shoreline protection definitely is a big thing, and that would obviously come from the federal and provincial governments stepping in. I see it all the time.
Yeah, I would concur with Brad.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gulick, and thank you, Mr. Thompson. And on behalf of all committee members, I want to thank our witnesses for giving us their time this afternoon. With that, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.